Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is October 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Scott Yanow. Is that how you pronounce it, Scott?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Yanow.
Yeah.
And where are you calling in from, Scott?
Well, a place called Lake Elizabeth, which is near Palmdale and Lancaster, about 20 minutes away from both, a little north of Santa Clarita.
Cool. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Well, to be able to breathe without pain, I think, would probably be the best thing. To be able to enjoy life without having to feel bad about, not feeling good physically.
Right. Breathe without pain. That is a great answer. I love when people say breathe, but just without pain is great.
Oh, I know.
What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, of course, I always enjoy and love recordings, particularly of jazz, but I watch TV. I don't really get too much news from the internet, just the little headlines. Just basically tells me that the world hasn't ended today.
Right.
So, and I like to hear from people, of course.
Right. And why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I'm sorry. Oh, what is this?
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, to keep them active, to keep them alert, really. Because without information, you're basically doing the same thing every day and you're very limited. So I think, the most interesting people are the ones that collect the most information, really, and they react to it and they hopefully grow from it.
Grow from it. Beautiful. And do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's more up to the individual, really. I mean, to a certain extent, you're going to collect information when you're a child, when you're a baby, just learning how to survive. But I think once people become teenagers, it's really up to them. It's more voluntary.
More voluntary. Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Well, thoughts influence it, emotion. I think some of it is automatic. If someone, if you break your arm, you're going to feel pain no matter what you're thinking at the time. But in general, I think that it's partly based on what people have learned so far, and really their information and their point of view.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's what I'm after is just because I word a question a certain way, it doesn't mean you can't, like you said, change the verb to influence rather than create. So I welcome that sort of, it's more like me and you versus the wording on the question. So I'm open to any sort of rewording.
Mhm.
Scott, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
Until I know enough, really.
know enough. Yeah, that's interesting because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
But one doesn't always express everything that they're thinking from their talking or from their writing. So there are
That's
things
right.
that one keeps to
Yeah.
themselves.
There's a bumper
So
sticker on my street on a car. It says, don't believe everything you think.
well, that's better than don't believe anything. You know, it's good
Yeah.
to believe something, but you have to
Yeah.
make sure you have enough information really, and then just use common sense to
Yeah.
form your beliefs.
Can humans think without language?
Mhm. Well, it's still a matter of just gathering and being careful what influences you.
Being careful. Yeah. Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Well, I quit talking. No, usually I'm good at expressing myself, and then quite often I don't need to express myself really. I just let events occur, and then influence it if I can, or duck, or run for the hills. It depends on the situation.
Yeah. Duck or run for the hills. I like that. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, everyone thinks and feels to a certain degree, but the people I tend to associate with are usually more on the thinking side. But there are people who just act out on their emotions, and unfortunately, quite often they're wrong because they're just acting on the short-term information, not really thinking about what they're doing. So it's a matter of balancing. You don't want to be cold and just do it pure logic, but you want to have a little bit of feelings. But I think the thinking side is more important, really.
Yeah. These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
It's hard to say. I mean, thinking is a function of the human being. I don't know if it's connected to the soul or not.
Yeah. Can machines think?
No, not yet. Anyway, with A1, maybe in 10 years or so, it's getting closer. Machines just do what they're programmed to do.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, my case, happiness. I'm not sure there's really any meaning anyway. I mean, you have your own goals and you have the things that are most important to you and you want to achieve. But I don't think it's really necessarily meaning. I mean, 200 years from now, I don't know if anybody's going to remember any of us really, except for maybe 10, 15 people in the world that are remembered, for
Wow.
whatever accomplishments they have. I mean, how many people do we know from the 1700s? Well, probably a few dozen, but everybody else is lost to history, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book. He says meaning tends to last and happiness doesn't necessarily last.
Well, I mean, we're human beings are always open to both happiness and sadness, so it really depends on one's philosophy and how you look at life, along with a lot of luck and the way events happen to occur in one's life.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Well, I think it depends on the person, really. It's a balance of both. I mean, the brain is creating even when we're asleep or unconscious. But that's, of course, some people are more creative than others, and some people emphasize that more.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Mm, Well, it's hard to say since speed of thought is pretty immediate, but speed of light, I would say speed of thought, really.
Speed of thought.
Hmm.
There's no wrong, right or wrong answers, but that one you got right, Scott.
But I don't really know.
The poet Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
Hmm. Well, I think you can dismantle with using. You could beat someone at their own game. It's a let's say let's say the master in this case is someone who was elected and you want to get rid of them. Well, you beat them in an election. It's still using the same tool, really. If you're looking at it in general, you know, if someone, say in big business, is corrupt but they're controlling, they're successful at controlling a large part of the world, then the way to beat them is to get someone who's better at the game than they are. So
Right.
yeah, so I think basically, you use your own tools unless you can invent new tools. You use what's there.
But the hidden question really is what tool do you most gravitate towards?
I mean, unless it's complete destruction, then you. But then again, the chances are they probably invested in weapons, so you're still kind of using their tools too.
Yeah, like conflict resolution in the big world situation is so dependent on military. It's like, why can't you resolve problems with negotiation rather than military?
Well, the military works faster, and it's what can you say? It must be more effective because it's always being used. Negotiation is uh, when your adversary is on the same level you are. If they're a lot higher than you are, or a lot lower, then it tends to be more military. So
What
I
new
would
tool?
I would say it's a beautiful world. It'd be so much better though if it weren't for the human beings.
Yeah,
That's the main conflict.
that sounds like Gandhi. What do you think of 20th century civilization? He said, "Good idea."
I know.
What new toy do you suggest?
What new toy is it? Well, just an old toy. Just thinking for yourself, really. I mean,
Oh, I like that. Thinking for yourself.
you could listen to everybody, but then come up with your own conclusions and your own thoughts. Too many people are being led by partly because they don't have enough information or they don't seek it out. The information's out there, but it's a matter of being inquisitive and really caring enough and interested enough to just find out what the situation really is. What's the reality of the world?
Good. Caring and inquisitive. I like those two words, Scott. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Mm, uh, I guess whether I'll wake up the next day, but I'm not
Yeah,
really that worried about it. I'll wake up the next day every day except for one. You know, and I'm not
yeah,
really that worried about it. I don't really worry about that much when I go to sleep. Really, I just think about what I'm going to work on the next day.
yeah. Can you forget to die?
Yeah, I'm not. I have no idea how it's going to end. Really,
Yeah,
no one really does unless they happen to have an illness and they have a clue. But in general, no one knows.
yep. Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Scott, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, because people want simple messages, and they just look at them on the surface. Um, Not all people, but the big majority of people, and they're concerned about just making a living and surviving through life. So they're not really listening to the artists. They never have, really. I mean, a particular artist might have a large audience for a short time, but in general, they people want to be entertained and they want to just be able to survive. So they're not even paying attention most of the time.
Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
Well, some think they do, and maybe they do. I don't really know. It seems like the only obligation they have is to create the art as interesting art as they can, whether they're moral themselves or really care about the human being. That's up to them. But I mean, if someone creates art and it's not that interesting, they're not going to go very far anyway. So it's a matter of being true to themselves and being as creative as they can.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Mm, Well, it has to do with quality, really. A lot of old ideas have stuck around because they're useful, and most new ideas haven't been tested yet. So it can go either way. Uh, Basic old ideas are good, but there's a lot of them that aren't. And And new ideas, it's hard to say because I haven't heard them yet.
Right.
So it could go either way, really. I mean, the key is to, be open to new ideas, but also know what the old ideas are, and then use or discard whichever one's fit.
It's good, Scott. Are you Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Well, I do remember when I was probably 3.5 years old, walk up, and my younger brother, who was 3 years younger than me, being in a baby carriage, and with my mother pushing the carriage. That's why my earliest memory.
Is
So that goes. So I was about 3.5 then.
right. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
For me, it's a blessing. If
Yeah.
one has children memories, then it's a curse. You know, it depends on the kind of life one has had. You can't be haunted by your memories, and the key is not to let your memories slow you down or pull you down. Use the better memories to help inspire you to keep on going.
Yeah. Can you tell me, please, someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Hmm. Well, I don't know if I really had role models. I mean, I tended to look at my father at what I shouldn't do, basically. I mean, I learned from a lot of people what I shouldn't do in life just by observing them and saying, well, it doesn't really fit my own beliefs or my own philosophy. I mean, writing about jazz, I can't say there's any real writer from the past that inspired me to want to write like them. I would learn from their bad habits and think, well, I shouldn't do that and shouldn't do this. Not that there weren't some great writers before, and I'd be inspired by the quality, but I didn't really use them as role models so much. So, so I guess I'm not really answering your question too directly, but I can't think of anyone who I really use as a role
Yeah.
model.
No, that's
I,
all right.
I just kind of
Th-
invent
th-
myself, for better or worse.
that's good. That's beautiful. Um, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, I'm Jewish, but it was really more my grandparents that pushed it a little bit. And actually, I had a bar mitzvah, but then after my grandparents uh, passed away, eventually, that was pretty much the end of it. The parents didn't really care all that much about it. They were just kind of pressured into it a little bit.
Do you
So
pray?
no, not really.
Yeah. Do you pray?
Once in a great while, but basically, I'm an armchair agnostic.
Yeah. Hey,
I like saying I don't know. I don't know if there's any purpose to anything, and I don't know if there's anything out there that helped us. I mean, I hope there is. I hope there's some logic to it that I don't quite understand, but I don't see the logic because like anyone else, I see good people having terrible lives and bad people getting away with it. So
yeah.
even though, so I don't see the logic. I don't think anyone's really looking and looking at the situation of the world and saying, well, I'm going to help this person or hurt that person. I think it's just been running itself. I mean, I know that what was it? Uh, Deism, right? Wasn't that the belief that there is a God, but he lets everything run itself, and then after it's all over, then you decide how you're going to be treated in the next life. Maybe that's true, but I don't see any proof of that either. So,
Yeah.
so I just try to live a good life, not because of religion or fear or being banished to hell or something, just because I want to.
That's
You know,
good, Scott.
I think
I
that's
like
the way
that
people should
attitude.
look at it. And
Beautiful.
it's fun to celebrate Christmas as far as getting presents, and it's fun to have holidays. But in general, I don't see much logic to it.
Yeah, it reminded me too what you were saying. Paul Krasner said, I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives.
Yeah. Well, reincarnation would be fun because then you keep on coming back. But what good is it if you can't remember, what you did
Yeah,
before? So, and I don't really see any proof of that either. Really, I don't know.
yeah,
But then again, I just say that I don't know and just leave it at that. I'm not going to say, oh, I definitely know that there's nothing because how would I know that either? So
yeah. Well, that's the word lie is in the middle of believe. There's something
Yeah,
to say there.
that's true.
Um, if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well, it'd be nice if you said, "Good job.
Yeah,
You did a great job. You know, you spent your time usefully." But I'm not really counting on it.
yeah.
See, my
You,
basic goals in life, to get a lot done and have a good time along the way.
yes,
If you balance
beautiful.
those, if you balance those two, and you're able to, then it's a useful life. You can't do one without the other, though.
Yeah. But do you think that basic attitude, get a lot done and have a good time, is
Along the way.
more from the way your parents raised you or more on your own? Those attitudes.
Oh, on my own. I'm basically self-taught in everything. When I went to college a year early, not because I only spent 3 years in high school, and it wasn't because my grades were good, because they were terrible. But I went to summer school each year just so I could get out of high school as soon as possible. So it was funny because I had just a little bit over a C average in high school, and then here I am in college, and all the straight A students are still in high school. So I always liked that fact.
Wow.
But 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 no, I was basically self-taught. When I went to college, I just said, okay, everything I've been taught and everything I learned was probably wrong. So let's start from scratch. So I did that when I was about ready to turn 17, and just had to teach myself everything.
Hey, you just
So I
quoted the
can't
name
really
of
say
our,
I'm influenced by parents or anything else.
you
And I
just
think people should do that. They should, look at their lives every few years, or at least a few times along the way, and say, well, okay, does this make any sense? Maybe I should, do this completely different, or learn more about this so I could be better at it, rather than
yeah.
just doing the same way for decades.
Well, that you evoked a lot there. One is the name of our podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. And then Firside Theater said everything you know is wrong, which happened to appear, this big new venue in Vegas, the Sphere. Have you read about that? It's
Just
a
a
big
little bit.
it's a big dome, and you could see U2 playing there last week, and on the back it said everything you know is wrong, like in huge letters.
Well,
I paid $500 to see this on a wall.
really. But then again, everything's not wrong. It
Right.
just by percentage and random, and you probably get a few things right. But the hard part is figuring out what is right and what's wrong. You know,
Well, it seems as though you approach things sort of like Pascal, the mathematician philosopher. He said, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that end and everything in between. It's like um, comprehensive awareness. You get the big picture view.
mhm. Yeah, it all comes down to the same basic thing where you just have to keep your mind open to new thoughts, and at the same time, have certain beliefs, but question the beliefs once in a while to make sure that you're on the right track.
Yeah. Do evil people exist or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Both, I mean, evil people, they always use other people. That's how they succeed. Just being bad isn't good enough. You have to figure out a way to take advantage of the situations against those who don't really protect themselves,
Yeah.
or those that are in the wrong place at the time. So, yeah.
Well, Scott, the hidden question really is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, the problem is is that one uh, action doesn't really fit all the situations. I think the easiest way or the best way to defeat an enemy is not let them know that you're the enemy. Be a
Yeah.
kind of a spy, learn the situation, and then when the timing is right, then you can get defeat them or get revenge or whatever the situation is. It You don't make it obvious. At least
That
that's what you try. Because if you start yelling at them and say, "I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that," well, then they know. So how are you going to defeat them? So I think it's a matter of just not don't let them know. Just be quiet, and just evaluate them and study them as much as you can, and then you'd have an idea how to win the situation.
Yeah, the American Indians, indigenous, say your enemy's your best teacher. And what you said was interesting because I learned from some younger friends who studied jujitsu and judo that the best fighters are the people who don't fight the fight. They don't even have a fight, you know, so they know how to avoid, it's sort of like you saying, don't let them believe they're even an enemy. Don't even let them identify themselves as that.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, you're much more effective that way. If you do want to defeat them, of course, this is really general. It depends on the situation. If someone's, beating up, then you have to defend yourself, and they know. But I'm talking about more psychological, or if you have,
Yeah.
say, a boss who doesn't treat you well, or maybe a neighbor or something, you have to figure out a logical way to defeat them rather than. I guess just in general, I would say, use logic rather than emotions, and that's what one should do when they make any important decisions. Because
Exactly.
emotionally you might get it right, but then quite often you won't, and sometimes it ends up being self-destructive. If you use logic and have a moment to think about it without emotions, there's a lot better chance of winning.
Yet also evoked both Krishnamurti and McLuhan said that violence is the human search for identity. Any thoughts on that line?
Silence, well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's sometimes silence comes in handy. It's a matter of knowing how to use space. You don't want to fill up the environment with nonstop sound or nonstop
Yeah, no,
talking.
I think you misheard the word. It's violence, VIO, violence. Violence is human search for identity.
Oh, oh, I don't know. Violence is but it's not always the most effective one, unless you're fighting violence. But even then, there's other ways to get around it quite often.
Yeah. What Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he say, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
Depends on the situation, really. It if murder weren't against the law, there'd be a lot more of them. I think it's a deterrent to a certain amount of people. But then again, if someone doesn't really care, then nothing's a deterrent. So I think it works to a certain degree, at
Yeah.
least in cutting down the amount of situations like that.
James Joyce was the first
A good
projectionist in
non-answer
Dublin.
for you.
Say it again. Oh, I missed the last thing you said. Sorry.
Oh no, I said it's kind of a non-answer I get. Maybe I'll get away with that one.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah. Uh, James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree. Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I don't go to too many theatrical plays, so uh, uh, sometimes it, like plays or movies or television, sometimes it gives people clues on how to deal with situations. Sometimes it doesn't. Uh, you know, it the better ones give you ideas what to do, or at least shows you that there are options and that you're not alone in whatever situation you're in. And so people go to plays to be entertained, really. I think a lot more than they go to it to think. Sometimes they just get some thoughts along the way as a bonus, some philosophy, but they basically want to be entertained.
Well, let's talk about the tipping points in your career choices. So you've talked about hearing jazz in the Danny Kaye film, and that attracted you to pursue music in your interest in music. But what's your tipping point to pursue accounting and then pursue the writing about jazz?
Well, like I said, early on, I saw the Five Pennies with film, and uh, it's sort of a semi-fictional story of Red Nichols, a cornet player from the 20s. And the thing I liked best about the film, in addition to Louis Armstrong being in it and some great music, was that the actors in it, the ones they were portraying, I think you could see that there were a lot of other problems with life, but the music was above everything else. It was always full of life. So, and the way I really got into jazz was after that. I noticed, excuse me, in the LA Times, they had a notice under the radio stations that there was a Dixieland show from 5 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. I can't imagine that taking place now, but at least then, on radio station KRHM. And I was about 15, almost 16 years old when I saw that, and I thought, well, this is happy music. I ought to give this a listen. And I got addicted to it very fast. Pretty soon, I was taping things from the radio, and that's really how I got started in jazz. Just the joy of the music and the fact that it's constant creativity, really. I mean, even when there's tight arrangements, the solos are different each time. They're making it up on stage or in the recording studio. So that's what kind of attracted me to the music itself. After I discovered a swing show, the swinging years, so I got into swing then. And then when I went to college, I was still 16 years old for a month or so when I first went to college. By luck, I was in a dormitory, and my neighbors were a lot of the musicians, so I got to hear jazz a little bit from them, and I managed to get through the door to bebop. And once I did that, then all eras of jazz interested me. And I had a friend, Brian Ashley, who was starting a couple years later was starting a magazine called Record Review. He had the idea for Record Review, and it was going to be a third rock, a third classical, and a third jazz. And I was going to be the jazz editor. So it took a few more years before it happened, but that's really how I started writing about it. And I thought, well, this is great. Like any other honest writer, I knew it'd be free records. So that was always an incentive, because I was becoming quite a record collector, and I it was a little late for me to be starting playing music professionally. I did get an alto sax early on, and then I eventually switched to tenor and clarinet and I've enjoyed playing at different sessions along the way, but I'm not really a professional. There are just too many great players. I've been doing that for a lot longer and a lot more seriously. But I love writing about it, and I loved hearing how all of the different styles and musicians connected with each other, through 100 years of recording. So, I haven't been bored since. fact, I tell people that my life may not be an action adventure movie, but it has the world's greatest soundtrack.
Scott, that was a good wrap up. I really appreciate it. Very concise, and you added some more details. But let's go back. When you were first hearing that Dixieland radio show, what was your peer group listening to? Were they listening to the radio, and what music were they listening to?
Probably Grand Funk and Led Zeppelin and all the different rock groups. This is the 1970, 71. I had listened to rock for like a year or so before that. I remember, so I know a fair amount about rock from 1969 to 1970. But even now when I think back on the songs that I like, they tend to have bit of improvising on, like Mason Williams doing Classical Gas, and I like the last jamming around, and and I remember that there was a big band on the song on Garfunkel's "Keep the Customer Satisfied." That was often that time period, and I liked all that before I realized that was kind of jazz oriented, and so in that direction anyway. I was never really a follower or part of a group as far as caring what my peers listened to, because by the late 70s they were listening to disco, and I was listening to Coltrane, so it was a little I was always on that.
Yeah. But Scott, that was good, because there were people like when we heard Blood, Sweat, and Tears, they're playing Eric Satie with the jazz flute sound. And, Zappa and Hot Rats was sort of inventing jazz rock fusion, which was along with Miles in a silent way. And I know we have a liking for Live Evil, which is just basically Miles trying to be Sly Stone and Jimi Hendrix with some great funk players like Michael Henderson on bass. But I'm really curious how you went to loving Live Evil as much as I do. I'll never understand that, but you could expound on that. But more so when they asked Frank Zappa, what do you think of jazz rock? He said, no, what do you think of jazz rock fusion, or fusion music, they called it. And Frank said, the only fusion I see is between the cash box and the musician. So, I mean, just your thoughts on that. How did you go from, Dixieland Swing and Train into Live Evil? Because to tell you the truth, I know this real famous jazz record executive who was a record store clerk in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And when we went in to buy Live Evil, he just scolded us. He said, "This is trash. You should be listening to Early Miles." And I love Early Miles, but you see what I'm saying? How was that crossover for you in finding an aesthetic to
Well,
love a Live Evil specifically? Yeah.
well, I'll tell you, just the general story. I started out with Dixieland and swing, and I got into 20s and 30s jazz. And then when I went to college, people would look at, and I mentioned this in the book, people would look at my record collection. I had 25 albums, and they say, "What a huge collection!" And of course, they were being sincere, but and they would look at it and say, "Whoa, Al Hurd, Pete Fountain, Dixieland, what is this?" So that's how I got the nickname of Steamboat, because that was what I was listening to at the time. But I heard the names Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie from these musicians, and I was curious as to what they sounded like. So I went to a used record store close by, College Records, which I'm sure has been going for at least 50 years now. And I saw a Charlie Parker record for $1.99 that, in addition to songs I never heard of, like Grooving High and Night in Tunisia, it had him doing a version of White Christmas. I said, "Well, I've heard of that song." So I bought that record. And at first couple of times I played it, I couldn't really get into it, but I played it twice a day for about 5 days. And by about the 10th time I heard it, the skies opened up, and I could understand what he's doing. Oh, he's playing, he's doing, he's stretching out in certain ways, and that opened the door. So after that, then wasn't that hard. I was soon into it. It wasn't that difficult for me to get into Eric Dolphy with Charlie Mingus and on it to listening to all the bebop guys. I very quickly got up to the current time, which was the early 70s. And I didn't have any trouble with, say, Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, which was his groundbreaking record, very popular using electric instruments and funky rhythms. And Live Evil was a new record when I got it. And I was able to get into that because Gary Bartz on alto takes some great solos, and they do stretch out a lot. It's not like it was really commercial music because they were playing for 20, 25 minutes on some of those cuts. So it wasn't being made just for the radio. They were really trying to experiment on and stretch out on using electric instruments for the time. And it wasn't that difficult, really. I would say, but I guess my mind was open. I mean, when you go from Louis Armstrong to then Pharoah Sanders screaming with Coltrane, that once you've done that and gotten up to Cecil Taylor, then everything else kind of falls in between. And so the people in the dormitory, they thought I was a little crazy Dukes of Dixieland and stuff, but then it turned out I passed them about 6 months later, and they knew I was nuts. So I was in the stuff that was much more advanced than they were by then. So, ever since. So they,
well, Scott,
crazy. Well, how can you listen to this in the ways? Well, you thought Dixieland was so.
Well, Scott,
listen to this.
Yeah, I would say
I've been filling in the gaps and trying to hear everything.
Yeah, fill in the gap. But I would say the thing about nuts, that's McLuhan's great line. You can't prove you're sane unless you have discharge papers from a mental hospital. So, anyways, we're breaking up a little. Yes, you heard that. Okay, so let's go to live.
I never tried.
Yeah. Let's go back to Live Evil for a second. Then,
so I never tried to prove I was sane.
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying it's a joke, but the problem is, I'm curious, or not the problem. I'm very curious about your input on. I really can almost breathe like Susie, my wife. You know her as a great jazz singer. She can breathe every groove in a Bessie Smith record. She knows like every pulse and scratch and everything. Like that's what happened to me in Live Evil. I know that 2-record set inside and out, like every moment. And then many years later, they released like a 6-album set of the Live Evil sessions unedited. But I think Tio Macero was one of the stars of that album, as well as a player, because he edited it down to 4 sides instead of, the unedited version. What's your feelings basically on that? Did you ever hear the unedited Live Evil? Because I literally avoided ever listening to it. And then one day I hit the wrong button on YouTube and I was listening to these unedited Live Evil sessions and I went, what the heck? And I didn't like it. I want to hear T.O.'s edit because that's what I felt was intended. Your feelings on releasing something like that in its full unedited version.
Well, since Miles Davis wasn't around to approve it or not, he might have said, "Don't put it out." It's always this question about alternate takes and additional material. If someone loves an album, they want to hear. Quite often, they want to hear what else took place. Hoping that it'll be the same. The producer knew best, or the musician at the time knew best, and they knew that this part's not really that interesting. We won't put it out. So when they do put it out, then it's easy to get disappointed because this wasn't exactly how they planned it. So it's the company wanting to make money, but it's also collectors wanting to hear the rest of what took place. So in the case of Live Evil, the Tio Marcel did a great job. He, even though some of the songs are quite long on the original double album, it makes sense. He spliced them in from different situations. It didn't all take place the same day, but it has a flow to it. Where if you hear everything that got cut out, there are some disappointing spots in it.
Yeah.
You know, there were some other records from Miles at the period that aren't quite as good. You know, there was On the Corner I never really liked, and I also was like about half a minute here, half a minute there from jam sessions that weren't that good. But Live Evo I always enjoyed. You know,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed it in 1973 when I got it. So,
Yeah.
and
It's,
yet, that doesn't invalidate anything Miles did in 20 years before. So it's
yeah,
just a
it's
different time
timeless for
period.
me. Yeah. And Scott, what was the kicking? What, tell me the tipping point to be a writer, specifically uh, criticism and your approach to criticism. I know you can expound on that, but did you grow up a reader reading nonfiction and fiction? And then when your friends started the magazine, how did you go, well, I've taken creative writing classes, I know how to write criticism? Or did you just dive in without, what's your tipping point to become a writer? Because basically that's your career, 40 years of writing, right?
Hmm. Almost 50.
Yeah.
uh, well, I never took I think I took one journalism class, and I don't remember learning anything from it in junior high. I didn't be serious. I took a couple that weren't serious, like just an easy A, but I didn't learn anything from them. And I was an accounting major, so I had nothing to do with it had nothing to do with music really. But I don't know. There was one time I remember reading Downbeat and thinking I could do better than that. You know, as far as the particular review I read, there was one review where someone cut down. Someone was complimenting a saxophonist, and in one sentence they said something like, "Well, this album's better than anything that," and then he names three people did in their entire career. And I thought, well, that's silly. That's not the way to write. So that's a matter of just learning what not to do. So there were times when I thought I could do better than this. You know, it's not that I'm a Pulitzer Prize or anything like that, but it's a matter of telling record collectors and both beginners and those who have been listening to it for a long time, just tell them what does a record sound like, and would they like it or not, and how does it compare to the person's prior work, and how does it compare to the music of today. It's really not. I never thought it was that difficult. Some people just agonize over it, but I'm able to write fairly quickly. I mean, yesterday I reviewed 8 records, 8 CDs. The thing that takes the longest is getting through it, because you have to listen to 8 hours worth of music. But as far as the writing part goes, just 10 minutes, a lot of times, unless it's something really complex or I didn't listen to it closely enough. It's so I just thought, well, this would be fun. Also, it's a way to get free records naturally, but also a way to get closer to the music and a good excuse to go out and hear concerts and pretending I'm working. Oh, I'm doing
That's
my work, right.
pretending you're
I
working.
mean, I know what real work is.
Yeah, that's brilliant wording. But
Yeah, I
there
have to
was
see
some,
3 concerts this week.
yeah, pretend you're working. I love that line. So, but Scott, you also mentioned somewhere that you don't critique, but you are a jazz critic. But I mean, Susie and I have always written about jazz people for jazz magazines, or we used to, but we would never pick stuff that we didn't like. And we didn't really like pan stuff or cut it down. And so this really goes to this question. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're reviewing a jazz CD?
So, with artists, I mean, of course, to them, they know about all the work they put into it and how difficult it was and all the hassles. And I think some critic, particularly one that's not a professional musician, say, "Oh, this isn't any good." But you know, my audience is really not musicians. It's jazz fans. I've always looked at it that way, and the jazz collectors, and I don't want to steer them in the wrong direction. If a record's not that good, most of the time, I won't be. I definitely we never do a personal attack on the artist. What I'll do is I'll say, well, this record's not as on the same level as the last one, or what, get this other album instead. Also, I try to give enough clues. Basically, my main goal is really I try to give enough clues to the reader so they'll know whether they're going to like it or not. I do or not is secondary, even though it's part of the review. If one doesn't like electric instruments, they should be told, yeah, this has electric instruments and funky rhythms, and I think it's a great record, but they might not like it because they only like bebop music. So, it's just a matter of communicating to the audience, and knowing full well I have the privilege of getting to hear more music than most people, and it's really my job to just make it easier for the consumer to know whether they're going to appreciate an album or not, or whether they should get it. And musicians, it's funny because when I get introduced as a great writer by a musician, that almost always means I wrote a good review of them last time. And if I'm a bum, I mean, if I write a negative one, then I'm a bum. So I can't take their opinions too seriously. I like it when they say I'm on the right track.
Yeah, but
as a
Duchamp,
consumer, I would really hate it. I would really hate it. I'd really hate it if someone they bought a record based on what I wrote and they don't like it. That's like the worst thing. The best thing is when they tell me, oh, because of you, I got introduced to these great musicians, and now I really like them. So that's what I'm aiming for, really.
Yeah, that's good. And so Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. You kind of already answered this, but what role does the reader play in your creative process when you're writing? How much are you thinking of the reader?
Oh, well, that's the audience. I'm always paying attention to the audience. If you're writing for a general interest magazine, then you have to be a little more detailed about what it sounds like as opposed to writing for Downbeat, let's say. But I always put in, even for beginners, I always say what instrument someone's playing. It's not Charlie Parker, it's Altus Charlie, his name, so they know he's a saxophonist, which is basic information for most of my readers, but there might be some new people that aren't familiar with him. So yeah, you have to know that you're writing for a certain audience, and it's important to pay attention to the needs, really.
Copeland says the 4 elements of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. How do you integrate and focus on those 4 elements? Is there something you're more tuned to, or you're just integrating them all 4 equally? Melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color.
Well, in jazz, there's also other qualities. I mean, the melody, harmony, and rhythm, and tone color, and that has to do really more with classical music than jazz. They're all important elements in jazz, but also I'm looking for color to a certain extent, which I guess would be tone color, but I'm looking for dynamics and originality of sound, and how interesting, or is it kind of boring? Not all recordings and performances are equal. And of course, whether it's boring or exciting has to do with who's listening to it, I realize. But to a certain extent, I try to say why. If someone comes out with an album and it's 5 straight songs, all the same tempo, pretty much the same chord changes, and unless they're really doing something interesting, and it's kind of dull sometimes. Where other people would do a great deal of variety, but sometimes they might have a little too much. So it really has to do with how it strikes me, really. Emotional intensity is part of it too. But originality really matters a lot in jazz, where in classical music, you're trying to play, you're playing what's there. So you could play it beautifully and you could maybe alter the tempo a little, but it's a different kind of music, really.
Yeah, I loved how you added dynamics and originality. That's really good. And one of my friends says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. So technique is you know how to play it, theory, you know the structure. How does one acquire taste?
Well, taste can be too if it makes it kind of dull, but we're playing what's right for the moment, really. Serving the music rather than being too self-indulgent. Even though I do like it when they get a bit self-indulgent, but if they get too carried away, with if the humor is too obvious, then it's not as interesting than if they have a certain amount of subtlety. Jazz has more subtlety than most kinds of music. I mean, if you listen to R&B or gospel, I mean, it's not about being subtle, really. But jazz, there's supposed to be it's good when there's emotion right below the surface. So there's more to it than is obvious, and that way, when you hear it again and again, you pick up more from it than if it's a simple tune and where everything's really obvious the first time around.
You know, the great director Billy Wilder said, "Make the subtleties obvious." And I love Keith Jarrett and I love his whole career, but he really has dissed what he did with Miles. He says that's garbage. And Keith is playing some great stuff on Live Evil. So, I mean, you talking about subtlety and what serves the music, that's very interesting.
Yeah, because you don't want everything to be obvious the first chorus. It's like when you hear someone who's just starting out and they're trying to prove themselves, sometimes they throw everything into the first couple of choruses. But it's better if it's spread out. That way, you have a little more hidden, and you have something to play the last chorus. So that's basically the music itself. It's the thing that attracts me to jazz is partly the fact that people are inventing the music on the spot to a certain extent, but also the wide range of emotions that can be expressed. It's the best jazz is not really obvious. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, on the spot is a good thing. That's I worked for George Carlin. We got a flyer in the mail once that said, "I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity." So Scott, back to this word taste. McLuhan says song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference. I'm really interested in that second part of what he said in your regard, having heard jazz invented in America basically, but played all over the world. So, what's your thoughts on this? The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference. Any thoughts on that line?
Well, I mean, they say jazz is an international language, and it's true that it can be played by anybody in any part of the country. I mean, any part of the world, I should say. That has the creativity and the musicianship and the personality to be able to perform it. A lot of times, with different countries, it depends on what instruments are available. Maybe certain instruments part of the culture, and what's available. I mean, why did jazz kind of start in New Orleans? Well, that's because there were a lot of instruments there, and so that's why it didn't start in Cincinnati or somewhere else. But I think that once the recordings became widely available in the 20s, it was really a world hit because there have been great plays in Europe ever since the 20s and in other parts of the world whenever the recordings are available. So even though it was founded by African Americans in the South, it can be played by anybody if they have the sensitivity and the musicianship and creativity to do it. But
What's
that's
more,
why I think a lot different countries have different instruments that are more widely available,
yeah,
and different traditions.
yeah. It's like Ry Cooder playing the blues with the guy from India or mixing in the tuba throat singers. There's a lot of crossover, and it really blends into the jazz world well. What's
Yeah, I mean,
more
jazz has
fun
always been a kind of a fusion anyway,
yeah,
even from the early days.
always been a fusion. Yeah. What's more fundamental, language or music?
Music, I think, because language takes a little longer to learn. If you hit a C chord, it, people understand it all over the world. But same thing in English. Most of the world won't know what you're talking about. So, you know.
Yeah.
So I think music is universal.
Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
I'm sorry, it broke up a little bit. What did you ask?
Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah. Oh, you mean
They always make me laugh.
their theme song? Yeah.
In music, but just anything they do. Before the '40s anyway. Anything they did in the '30s was hilarious. You there's nobody funnier, I think.
Yeah.
On so many different levels.
And I would say there's a few Thelonious Monk songs that make me laugh, and they have
No,
no words. And Monk said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
well, I think if I picked up a trumpet and blew something, it'd be a wrong note. But yeah, I mean they're all wrong notes. But the thing is, most notes can be, you can resolve it depending on what the next note's going to be.
That's what when we asked Hannah
You know,
Brooks that question, she said it's just how good
I mean,
you
there's
pump
no.
them up.
He will say there's no wrong notes on the piano, too, but depends how you hit.
Yeah.
Now
And
you don't want to
then
hear me play trumpet. I always say that there are two notes I could hit. Two notes I could hit on the trumpet. One's god awful, and the other is much worse.
and Monk also said silence is the loudest sound in the universe. Miles Davis talked about this space between notes, and George Clinton says funk is the absence of. Talk about the use of silence in jazz, and how do you recognize this uh, space between notes?
Oh yeah, well, music and just silence. You always you're always alternating between the two, and silence is really like a period, or yeah, it's basically a period. So you don't want to just write without any punctuation. Silence is a good contrast to sound. Because then when you play the next one after a bit of silence, next note after a bit of silence, it has more effect than if you're just having it be one endless run on sentence. You want to make it a conversation.
It's good. I like that
And
comparison.
the best players know that. You know, yeah.
I like that comparison. Thank you, Scott. That's good. Ruth Draper said the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. That sounds good, but how does that happen? How does that accomplish by the performer? I mean, you've seen many live shows.
Well, it's a matter of you know, it's like how do you have a conversation? You construct it. There's a certain amount of planning. If someone asks you something, you have an idea how you're going to answer it. But in jazz, you improvise a bit, and you're not quite sure how you're going to every single note you're going to hit. So it's a matter of using variety and different moods, and like I say, space and sound, really.
Leonard Cohen said the only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. How does risk play a role in your creative process?
Mm. I don't know. I mean, the hardest part about writing is just, first when you see an empty page and you have to put on, you're creating something out of nothing,
Yeah.
basically. You do that in music too, but in music, you might have an arrangement or you know what song you're going to play. When you're writing it, I think about it beforehand, briefly, just how I'm going to construct the piece or the review. But yeah, so that's the hardest part is, and the most dangerous part, I guess, is what's the first sentence going to be. But of course, once you've gone through it, unlike in jazz where you play it and that's it, it's out there, particularly live performances, at least I get to erase what doesn't work and fix it. Not quite as dangerous, really. You just want to be able to communicate to people and to have it make sense, really.
What does courage mean to you now?
Courage. Well, courage is helping someone not knowing whether they're going to appreciate it or whether anybody really cares. You help them because you want to.
Yeah.
And being brave, just going your own way and doing what you think's right, really. Not worrying about the money aspect or what other people think. Of course, the older you get, quite often the less you think anyway. But uh, you're courageous when you do the right thing despite all the odds.
This is Viola Spolin. She was a social worker in Chicago who sort of spawned the comedy improv world of the Groundlings and Second City and Saturday Night Live. And she said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. And it's a great line because I think when I read about Sonny Rollins, after a show, he would go backstage and keep playing. And the guys in the band would go, dude, we're done. And he goes, I'm still trying to work things out. What
Yeah.
role does struggle play in your creative process?
Well, he could be a bit fanatic.
Yeah, I missed that. Say it again.
Oh, he could be a bit fanatical about it too. John Coltrane was like that. Also, he'd play a solo for 40 minutes or so, and then the set's over, and then he during his break he's playing in the back room, still practicing for his next hour-long solo. Yeah, it's like.
But
maybe that's
I'm
why
saying
he didn't go that long, but it was just a amount of fanaticism.
But I'm saying, in your regard, what role does struggle play in your creative process?
Not too much, really. The only struggle I have is getting everything done on time, because I'm very prolific. I I review at least 30 albums, 30 CDs a month easily, and writing all kinds of other articles and things. So the only struggle really is just looking at my to-do list and figuring out what I can stall till tomorrow. It's just like being a constant juggler because, well, just to mention what it is I do. I mean, I'm a regular contributor to 6 magazines. I write liner notes and bios constantly, and of course I have all the CD reviews and live performances. So it's just a matter of keeping my sense of humor about it and not letting it drive me crazy. The main thing that saves me is having a list, because I can put something down and say, "Oh, I'm going to do this a week from tomorrow." then I don't have to worry about it until then. And
Yeah.
I follow, a certain philosophy. I get in everything early, and if someone wants a 500-word review, I send them 475 words. Then they're happy. You send them 550 words, they're not happy. So it's just knowing how to do it correctly. But as far as it being, death-defying or hair-raising, yeah. I mean, I know what it's like to have a job, and this is much more fun.
Right. You're like the great subgenius. Pull the wool over your own eyes. So, Scott, here's Ben Ratliff in the Bill Frisell book. I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So me and you could hear Miles and we go, Ben says, oh, that's fragile and pointed. So he summarizes Miles in 2 words. Coltrane, slightly undercooked and urgent. If a writer was to review Scott's writing, like Nat Hentoff or some writer that you really respect, if he was going to say, well, Scott is this and that, what 2 words would you most appreciate them describing your writing style as a jazz writer?
Well, I don't know if it'd be 2 words, maybe understandable and accessible, but I think when people do evaluate my stuff once in a great while, I hear it. It's to the point. I don't waste words. I sum it up fairly quickly. Really, I could sum up pretty much any record in 100 words. I don't feel the need to go on for thousands of words about a particular song or a particular session, although I can. But in most cases, people appreciate it if you're just concise.
Yeah.
So maybe concise and understandable.
I like those 2 words. Very good. Thank you. What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch, like even the cave musicians, we don't have records, or the cave dancers, but cave artists, we have a record. What's your hunch or guess? What was their motive?
Mm. Yeah, unfortunately, the connection is kind of on and off, so I missed that question. Can you
What
repeat
was
it
the
again?
what was the motive of the cave artist?
The motives of the I'm not sure what you meant.
Cave artist. What was the motive of the cave artist?
The cave artist? Uh, well, I mean, I think the motive is just to uh, express themselves and to show the world what they're thinking, really, and what they're seeing, and maybe document what's happening.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Oh, darn, it's fading, kind of.
What's more important, conviction or
But I
compromise?
think one of the main motivations, uh, well, it depends. That you get more done if you compromise, but you should have a basic position. You should have have basic beliefs that are strong, but be willing to compromise on the aspects of it that aren't that important to you. See, it's when you don't want to compromise, then you get in trouble and nothing gets done. That's what you have in Congress, let's say. But if things are, if you have a few things that are really important to you and everything else is just window dressing, you can compromise on the minor things and still get a lot done. and give the other side a chance to pretend that they won also. So much common sense is lacking from the world anyway. It always has, but it's gotten worse, you know,
Yeah.
because people are just so extreme in a lot of their beliefs, they don't even want to listen to each other. And by not, if you don't listen to each other, you don't learn anything. All you do is hear people that believe in the same thing you do. Then you don't evolve, and you're just the same. And then you wonder why nothing gets done. You know.
Yeah. You've accomplished a lot, Scott. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Well, mm, well, I'm an opportunist, so I guess that would fall into the ambition. Just to give you, there was the Oxford Dictionary of Jazz. One time, out of nowhere, they sent me a note asking if I'd like to write about one artist, and I said sure. And then I immediately came up with 20 more that I noticed they didn't cover. I said, how about you have me do these? And they were into it, and I ended up doing about 50. So that's the ambition part, being an opportunist. Luck, well, for me, the main way I got into jazz to begin with. Ever since then, I wouldn't say it was really luck. And ability, well, that's for us to say, really. I mean, I write in a fairly simple way because I want people to understand what I'm saying. And there were some writers in music when I read this stuff and I have no idea what they're talking about. And it's like I feel like I have to get a dictionary to figure out if they like a particular record or not. That's, you have to be able to communicate to people. So I keep it fairly simple. My vocabulary on it, but I try to write without too much repetition and just get to the point. So if I were to say that, I would say maybe ability, but the ability was something that a certain ability that I have to be able to communicate. I think that along with the ambition. So I pop up in all these magazines. Uh, I think that's most important. I mean, am I most opportunistic? There was one time when I thought, well, the jazz magazines, they don't pay enough, so I'm going to write for every one of them. So in 1 month, I was in 12 magazines at the same time. And it really confused people because every magazine I'd open up, there I would be, getting my $10 review. And it probably didn't really help me in the long run, but I thought it was funny at the time.
Very good, Scott. $10. Now you revealed how cheesy
So
they pay magazine writers. So Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Well, it's important to be expressive, to let people know what you think. And have an idea. I mean, the audiences have an idea, how musicians feel about a song and putting their feeling into it. But, one should always be aware of the technology. I mean, I'm grateful for emails, because I remember not too long ago, having carbon paper and, having to go to a store to get something Xeroxed and just sending them stuff in the mail. I request a record from England. It took 2 weeks for the letter to reach, and 2 weeks for the record to come back. So it'd be a month. But right now, it still amazes me that I do something and they have it within seconds, and it still takes a little while for it to get here, but I get it within a week as opposed to 4 weeks. So, I always appreciate that because unlike people who are a bit younger than me, I do remember what it was like. And I'm glad that carbon paper and white out are not common in my life.
Can art making, music making, writing be egoless?
Well, some people are that way. It's just not an ego thing for me. I don't write about myself. I mean, I did in my memoirs purposely, but other than that, in my writing, I very, very rarely ever use the word I. So I purposely avoid that completely. And it's not about me. It's about the music. It's about the artists. And one always has to keep in mind because they're the ones who are the creators, not the writers. Now we're the ones, we have our function. Some people say, oh, the critics, they're completely worthless, but usually that just means they got a bad review recently or they disagree with something. It's the purpose for jazz journalists, and that's to communicate to the audience the recordings that we're lucky enough to get to hear or the performances. But it's not about me. I mean, I get in the time to go see things in New York because people don't know where I live. So that means I'm successful at keeping it my own life out of the story.
Yeah. Is perception reality?
Well, it is to the person who's perceiving it. If you see something a certain way, then that's your reality. Whether it's true or not, that depends on your state of mind and what you actually saw.
Scott, you've written for 50 years. Tell me one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
Well, I don't think my writing style has really changed much. I mean, I don't usually go back and look at my stuff, but once in a great while, I'll read something from the 70s, and it sounds about right. I don't regret anything I've written. And you have to realize I've written about something like 21,000 recording reviews, 950 line notes, and I don't regret any of it. Now, of course, if I make a mistake or if my English isn't the best, I spell someone's name wrong, I regret that. But I mean, as far as the opinions and the general way I wrote it, it still sounds fine. I was really careful then. You're not supposed to. I follow certain rules. You're not. If you don't like a particular kind of music, and if you can't tell the difference between good and great, anybody could tell good and bad, but good and great in that kind of music, then you shouldn't write about it. You have to know, is this what they're playing original, or is it just a copy of something from 40 years ago? And you're supposed to know that if you're writing about it. You're supposed to know more than the average person because you're the one who. So it can be looked up, and it's just a matter of endless listening, really. So I don't really see any real change, except hopefully I've gotten a little better, but I think the basics were there at the beginning.
And Scott, that reminded me of we're doing a research project on archiving. Do you think this need or want for humans to archive is more innate or more invented?
It's necessary, really, more than anything else. You want to be inventive and make it colorful and readable, because a lot of projects that are done at universities are scholarly, it could be kind of dull. You don't want. So in that way, you're inventive, but together, just make it interesting all the way through. But it's basically just the word I would say would be necessary. Archive things, you don't document them, they get lost. History is so important.
Right, but if you have any plans for your archives, do you have it going to a jazz museum or a college that archives?
I'm not sure yet. I know I should.
You just got it stored in
my writing, it's out there.
Yeah.
Well, as far as my writing goes, books and line notes, I mean, they're out there, so I don't really have to worry about documenting that so much. And the thing that I'm not sure about yet is my record collection. It's pretty huge, quite huge, because it was always my goal to get every good jazz record ever made. And of course, you never quite make it, but I'm probably within a couple of thousand now of getting everything I really wanted from hundreds. But where's it going to go afterwards? I don't know yet. I'm open to suggestions as far as libraries and donations. I really don't want it to scatter to the wind afterwards. I don't think it will. Have to be a hurricane, really. It's just too much stuff. But so I don't know. I don't know yet.
Moshe Feldenkrais. Yeah, well, I would say you've got to think about it, but you don't have to. Like Joan Baez said recently about her archive, burn it. But her assistant said that they're
Yeah,
negotiating with the
because it
Smithsonian. Scott, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and
because
movement. Oh, go
I've
ahead.
seen. Uh-huh.
Go ahead. Yeah, we got quite a delay there. Can you hear me?
Well, you know, oh yeah, no, it's been doing that a little bit, but I've been able to work
Yeah.
around it.
So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's
So I
literally,
didn't quite hear the last question.
yeah. Moshe says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Hmm. Well, off the topic, I always hear about, oh, this music's for healing and all that, but what are we healing from? Healing from living everyday life and getting the disappointments, and I think there's a little too much emphasis on the healing aspect, and should be more just on the fun aspect, really. I mean, to me, with jazz, it's like the most fun stage, making it up, as they go along, knowing full well they might fail, but probably they're going to be okay. That to me is very exciting. As far as I don't listen to music as a healing thing. I listen to it as a world of itself. It's not even an escape. It's something different. I could bury myself in any decade. I could be listening to the 1930s all day long, and it's not. I don't have to dress up like in the 30s or even use the slang, but to experience the music, it's just really a joy. I mean, I wish the music, I wish jazz had been documented before the 20s, before 1917. It'd be great to hear music from 1890s, and then I wish recorded music were around before the 1890s. What did it sound like in the 1850s? But we're very lucky to be able to go back to I could live through the 20s, no problem. Just put on one record after another, and there you are. You're right back in the time period. So I mean, it's just such a treasure.
I love you brought out that fun
That's what I
aspect.
listen to the music.
Yeah, the fun aspect was really well articulated. Yeah,
People,
and
people don't
look
do
what's,
that. They yeah.
go ahead. The
Well, I was going to say that that's not it's not mentioned enough when people talk about jazz. They say, "Oh, it's intellectual. Oh, you need a music degree to be able to appreciate it. Oh, listen to this chord against that chord." Nah, you don't need anything. All you have to do is have open mind and ears, and just be open to it. And it's fun. It's really fun. Now, some of it can be boring, some of it can be tedious, like anything else in life. But most of it is quite enjoyable, no matter what the style or no matter who's playing it. If you approach it with just without preconceptions and say, okay, I want to hear what you have to say. And it's unlike any other music. If you listen to a pop or a rock person, chances are they're duplicating the record to a certain extent. They might be stretching out a bit, but they're trying, particularly if they're real popular, they have a few hits, they're playing it the same because that's what the audience wants. But in jazz, even if it's a popular hit, chances are it's going to be a lot different in person than you heard on the record. And you don't know what it's going to be like. So it's always a matter of suspense and excitement, and he might flop, but chances are they won't. Chances are it'll be something really worth hearing.
Yeah, I really love your aspects on fun and open-mindedness. That was beautiful. Thank you, Scott. And how has writing about jazz shaped your behavior?
Hmm. Well, it gives me kind of a purpose, really. It it gives me a certain amount of discipline because I have to get things done at a certain time. It gives me a reason to, an additional reason really to get up in the morning, and it's enjoyable because it's like constant discovery. You're always discovering new things. Even if you're listening to music of the past, there's new things to discover in most recordings. So I love it. It's great fun.
What gives you the most optimism?
What's Well, I'm optimistic in general for the music. In the world, I don't know. It's in the world you just have to be kind of realistic and kind of avoid all the as many negative things as you can. In the music is there's so many great young talents around in any one time. I think there are more potentially great musicians in jazzwood right now than any time in its history. Now, one would say, "Oh yeah, what about this person and that person? They're not around anymore." Well, there are just so many potential great Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellingtons and Charlie Parkers that are around. The musicianship is pretty high, and it's just a matter of them all coming up with developing their own voices and their own way of playing. But yeah, I'm very but the music I feel like I have a little more influence on.
Well, Scott, we've been done going for 90 minutes and it's been an amazing time. And I wish our connection was a little better, but you sure communicated a lot of good newness to me. I really appreciate your time and energy in all your writing. And I hope to see you playing at Brad Kay's again someday on that saxophone because you bring a lot of joy to your writing and music in general. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this, and yeah, just trying to spread the joy of the music, really, and which to me is really the joy of life. So, yeah, thanks for all the interesting questions and for laughing in the right spots.
Thanks, Scott. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Okay, you take care, and thanks.